Welcome. We're going to pause as we allow everyone to come in to the webinar today. Hi, my name is Noemi Guevara, and I'm the Director of Alumni Engagement here at California State University, Long Beach. We thank you for joining us today for our next edition of the 49er Industry Chat. Before we start, we'd like to let you know this session is being recorded and it will live on our website at csulb.edu/alumni. We also encourage you to use our Q&A box located below or above to submit any questions for our guest speaker today throughout the whole chat. And now I would like to introduce our moderator for the chat, Lucia Cost. Lucia earned her degree in Spanish in 1975. She was recognized as a distinguished alumna in 2005 and now serves as a council member for the CSU Alumni Council. Lucia, thank you for moderating the chat today, and now I turn it over to you.
Hey, welcome, everyone. Eric Harrison is a Senior Vice President with Signature Development Group, and he's been with them for over 35 years, with 35 years of experience in real estate development. So Eric's expertise is large-scale infill development with a focus on obtaining entitlements and complex approvals from governmental agencies. Notable infill mixed-use developments including Mission Bay, Brooklyn Basin, and Candlestick Cove. Eric's experience also includes property acquisition, due diligence, budget preparation, oversight of infrastructure construction, creation of public financing mechanisms, negotiating land transactions, and risk management planning to address impacted soil and groundwater. Eric is a double alumna of CSULB, and he earned his BA in geography and his MA in liberal studies. Hosting today's industry chat, please welcome Mr. Eric Harrison.
Thank you, Lee. Thank you very much. It's a real honor to be able to participate in one of the industry chats. To give you a little bit of background of me, I spent a few years of undergraduate school at Cal State Long Beach, and I have to say from the very beginning is I never intended to get into real estate. When I started college, I had no idea what I wanted to do. I was just someone that loved the natural sciences, anything to do with the environment. That was my interest at the time. Just happened to take a couple of geography classes and said, boy, these are really interesting, and kind of fell into geography. And while I was studying geography, I had a particular emphasis on, again, more of the natural environments than the spatial, like biogeography, climatology, et cetera. Those are the things that really fascinated me. But as it got closer and closer to graduation, it's like, what the heck am I going to do? You know, I didn't want to go on at that time to graduate school. And you know, often people say that hey, geography majors often go into teaching or whatever. That wasn't what I wanted to do. But I found out that some geographers actually become city planners. And I said, what the heck is city planning? But it sounded interesting. And I was fortunate enough in my junior year, in the spring semester, I was able to get an internship. And I was able to get an internship with the city. It was volunteer with the city of Huntington Beach. And it gave me a little bit of exposure of what city planning was all about. No, I should say what it was about on a very small perspective, but it was something that seemed like, yeah, that's an industry or a career that I would be interested in. When I finally graduated, I had a couple of other internships, one with the city of Irvine, the other with the city of Fountain Valley. I graduated in '85 and then was looking for, and shortly thereafter, I got a real job with the city of Anaheim. And I was an assistant planner and an environmental coordinator for environmental documents until I left the public sector in '89. It was all fine, but for me, it just wasn't where I really wanted to end up for some reason. And you have to understand that for me, I didn't know much about business. I had taken a couple of business classes, and at the time when I was, in college, I was like, yeah, this stuff's boring. Who cares about this? I want to know about why the world was and why things happen. But with work experience, all of a sudden it's like, hey, making money, that's a good thing. So I ended up working for a private firm, which primarily was consulting, engineering, and planning. And I was able to use the skills that I had working for the city in managing development projects for developers. And I found that something I really started to enjoy. It was challenging, problem solving, and it was all really interesting. And this was in the early 90s. And then suddenly the recession came in 92. And a significant amount of our workload dropped off just immediately. It was literally like someone flipped the switch. And instead of working 50 hours a week or 45 or even 40 hours a week, suddenly I was working 32 hours a week or getting paid for 32. Then I thought, it'd be a good idea to go to graduate school, and go to graduate school so I could become a developer, because I'm working for developers. And that's where it seems like something that would really, I'd really love to be. And I applied for a couple graduate schools. All of them were all full-time, cut back on their part-time programs. And so then I said, I'll just put a program together and go back to Long Beach. And from a big picture standpoint, that's what I did. And it was really enjoyable. And it really helped me prepare myself in the development industry. And it helped me propel my career.
Eric, can I ask you, just stepping back a little bit, who connected you with that very first internship? How did that come about?
I went to my academic advisor, and at that time it was Dr. Richard Outwater, I believe. And this was in the geography department. And I'd only been, by that time, I declared myself a major when I was a senior. It's like, I don't know where I want to go. And he had suggested to go down, and I don't know if it's still on campus, but to go to the Exponential Learning Center. So I went down there, and he didn't even say anything about a planner. And there were these binders, like 3-inch binders, 2.5-inch binders. And I just went down there and said, I'm looking for a career. What can I do? I'm looking for whatever. And they said, a lot of geographers look in this, I think it was like that binder. And that's where I saw city planning. I'm like, yeah, that seems fine. And then they go, we don't have any internships available that we can refer, but why don't you contact the cities on your own? And I'm like, and I can be a man on a mission. So that's what I did. I went home, started calling every city, and I was persistent until finally one day Huntington Beach said, we have an opening. And I'm like, I'll be down. They're like, no, you need to schedule an appointment. But that's how I got onto that track.
Great. And it looks like you then moved on to other cities and incorporated all the expertise, the new expertise that you picked up at each location, right?
Oh, absolutely. And I have a saying is that what you want to do is in this field is you want to put as many tools in your tool bag as you can. So you pick up expertise and understand processes and different functions so that you can carry those forward into your career.
Great. So now we can fast forward to where you left off in terms of getting into the real business world and not the public sector.
Yeah, sure. So when I went to graduate school, I really wanted to go to USC for their real estate development program. And they had a part-time program, but in 92, they said, we're doing away with it. It was a little bit frustrating. They said, we found out that part-time students don't make the commitment. So that's when I decided, I think I'll put a program together, an interdisciplinary program together at Long Beach. And I got an academic advisor. We worked on a program. I had to put together a statement of purpose, but I was only going to go part-time because I was working, and it was very broad. So I had classes in geography, lots of classes in finance and in the business school. I had a few classes in public policy dealing with community development and redevelopment. And my advisor had recommended that I take a scheduling class in the civil engineering department. So it was a true interdisciplinary program, and it was very broad.
Can I ask you, Eric, how did you know? Because I wouldn't have figured it out myself at that age, but how did you figure out that you could put together your own plan?
I think, what I was looking at, this was back in the days when you still looked at a catalog, not online. So I had the catalog, and I was like, I want to go, but I didn't want to get an MBA. So that was the fallback. Go get an MBA. And I'm like, yeah, I don't want to do an MBA because it has a lot of classes that I thought were more extraneous and weren't going to benefit me. And then somehow I ended up on the interdisciplinary page where it says, students can do undergraduate or graduate schools by putting together their own program. And I said, oh, I should check with Dr. And it was Dr. Costa that ran the program. I should reach out and see what this is all about and find out more if this will actually meet my needs or if this is something that's kind of fanciful. And it was no, it was like, this really happens. And this is how we go forth with it, by putting together this statement of purpose and all this. And even though it was I guess at first it was a bit of a challenge, but it really benefited me because it made me get organized and really think about the program I was going to do and how it would benefit me.
Well, for a lot of the student and alum that are listening in right now, this is a great opportunity for them to see that working with advisors on campus is really important. And you have to kind of look and see what your resources are.
Absolutely. And when I was in undergraduate school, I really didn't utilize the resources to the maximum extent that they were there. But in graduate school, I guess because I was more comfortable, whatever, a little older, I had been out of school 8 years roughly. So I was more mature, and there's a lot of resources, and it's well worth building the relationship with a professor or two, getting to really know the academic advisors. All those things are really easy. It's just, are you willing to make the time and see the benefits that generate from that?
Okay, so there's a couple questions, but I think they'll fit in after you get into a little more detail about where you're at, in your discussion. Because I know you were talking about you're in grad school, and then where were you working during grad school?
So when I was in grad school, I was working for, the firm's name was RBF, Robert Bine William Frost, and it's a consulting firm. And so I was working, and all of my classes were either in the evenings, so that worked well, started at 6 to 9. And so I'd leave the office at 5 o'clock, and I could get to Long Beach easily by 6. Or what was nice with the, I also took some classes at UCI too. And I was able to fold all that in. The public policy classes, it's a graduate program, I think, as everyone may know, and they cater to the working students. So they have some of their classes meet this is when I was in school, 3 times a year, or 3 times a semester for Saturday and Sunday. So you meet at the beginning of the semester, all day Saturday, all day Sunday. You meet middle of the semester, all day Saturday, all day Sunday, and then you wrap up. And that was really great. So I was able to take some of those classes. But anyway, my going part-time, I was going to school 3 years. I finally wrapped up all of my classes in 95, did my project, and graduated in 96. And by 96, Southern California was slowly but surely coming out of that recession. And at that time in 96, one of the clients I had asked me to come work for them. So almost concurrent with the time I graduated. Now a developer, which was the Akins companies, they knew me. I had been working with them for a number of years. They said, "Hey, Eric, we've got a project manager position. Do you want to come work for us?" I'm like, "Oh, this would be great." And I started working with them in April of 96, which was great. By the summer of 96, a larger firm acquired them. And then by the fall, they had asked, "Hey, Eric, there's a project up in San Francisco we want you to work on." And I'm thinking, I'm not moving to San Francisco. Everything's good where I am. Family's good. We live in a great neighborhood, et cetera, et cetera. And then guess what? I'm up here. But it was that move. I moved up to San Francisco working on Mission Bay, which is a large infill project. Was significant for my career. If I hadn't have made that move, I don't think my career would have advanced as rapidly as it did, because it was a large infill project that was very noteworthy and complex.
Okay, so Eric, back to the first company you worked at that you went, and the connections you made with the people that eventually hired you. How did you, what is your best advice in terms of how you interconnect with other folks when you're looking at your future growth and the potential of maybe networking with some of them?
So networking in the real estate development industry, it's a very small industry. And if you don't know someone 1 degree apart from you is probably going to know that individual. So networking is really important. because what most individuals do is they just pick up the phone if they're looking for someone, and they may say, Lucia, I'm looking for a project manager. I know you had a couple of people that worked for you and they moved on. What do you think of them? That's the way that industry works. And I have to tell you that since '96, I have never really looked for a job. I've changed jobs, but they've all been, someone's picked up the phone and called me and said, hey, Eric, there's an opportunity or this or that. But I'm not saying that good, bad, or indifferent, but that's just what's happened. So your networks, having your network is really important, and being involved in industry organizations to the maximum extent practical is important too.
So one of the questions from the listeners is, what skills and experience do you attribute to your growth in the industry, and what made the difference for you in your success?
I would say a couple of things. Being able to go to graduate school and understand or get financial literacy was important. Also in graduate school, I took the class in scheduling. A lot of people say, yeah, I understand, know scheduling, but to really know it is really important as a project manager, because that's critical to understand. But then I think, in my opinion, what really makes a big difference as a project manager is that you have to have that innate curiosity, because as a project manager, when we're working on projects, there's really three components, but the component that probably keeps you awake at night and wakes you up early in the morning are solving problems. And to solve problems, you have to be willing to read documents, look at other case studies and other aspects to try and come up with solutions, because that's most of the time we're solving problems. It's not like I'm designing a building, because I have an architect that's doing that. And so it's just that curiosity that you're willing to ponder about it when you're off work, when you're on the weekends, and you're willing to do a lot of research to try and really understand the nature of that problem and how it often has been addressed in the past.
So Eric, it sounds like you had that curiosity even before, because it sounds like is this something that you've always had in terms of looking at things and saying, okay, what's behind the screen? What's, let me do some research here. That takes you, to different places, because not everybody does that.
I think to some degree, it's, I've always had that question of, how, why, or why, how, why does this happen and how does it happen? And it's just that I always want answers. I'd like to know answers, why things happen or what to expect. And so maybe that's just the way I'm wired.
Yeah, no, I mean, as a person that hired people, I always look for people like that, because you look beyond and it makes you more competitive, basically.
True.
Okay, so now you move up to the Bay Area, and that was a big step for you, a big change. It kind of changed your trajectory almost.
Yeah, it did completely, because in Southern California, from a real estate development standpoint, I was doing all what we call greenfield development, was essentially development on land that was either ranch land or farmland or things like that. And now I'm up in San Francisco working on a project which is sizable. It's 303 acres, but it was an existing industrial site. And it was no longer looking at single family homes and a retail center with a grocery store, whatever. This was all what we call very high urban development. So on the 303 acres, we were planning, and we had UCSF building a new research facility of 4.6 million square feet. We had planned 6 million square feet for life sciences offices, and then 6,000 dwelling units. And to give you a scale, the minimum density was about 100 units to the acre, and that's a 5-story residential building. And we had some buildings that would go up to 160 feet. So that was something completely different for me. I really didn't grow up in the city. I grew up in Orange County in the suburbs. And so this was, another learning experience, which I really wanted to embrace, to understand better about the urban environment and everything what it meant to be in the urban environment, from transit to dealing with infrastructure to actually coming up with open space planning, how it's planned differently than you would do in a suburban environment, and then having to deal with all the constituents. Because in an urban environment, you have all of these built-in constituents, where if I go out to the suburbs, like out in the Inland Empire, there may not be many people or a lot of constituents that you have to deal with and incorporate those elements into your development proposal.
Great. I've got some more questions coming in. Now they're really coming in. So I'm trying to filter through them and allow for your progression too. So what steps did you take to become an expert in large scale infill development? How did you establish that as your niche?
I wouldn't say I'm an expert. I just do it. So my experience. So it's just understanding. It's understanding how infill differs from greenfield development. So working with a multitude of architects, but the architect's only one aspect to it, but it's also working with some designers to understand that urban fabric, which is different than suburban. And the urban fabric, I don't want to dive into it too deep, but in an urban fabric, I would say kind of the overarching principle is your block size. Because when you're in an urban environment, you're not always driving a car. You're often walking or using transit or whatever, and that block size is so important. So to understand the basic principles of urban development, I think really can help propel your career in infill development or in the urban environment. And also, in every project I've worked on in the urban environment, often one of the most challenging aspects outside of getting approvals is that the historical uses have resulted in contamination in the soil and groundwater. So it's having an understanding, not being an expert because you're going to hire experts, but understanding, is there a solution that would allow residential or commercial or some other uses on that given the historical uses? So it's a matter of being able to think and visualize of how you're going to put together your vision. And does your vision actually work on that site? Now, does that mean that you become an expert over time? I don't know if you're an expert or not, but those are the kind of steps. It's more involved than doing, I don't want to say simple, but than doing greenfield development because you don't have as many constraints. And so you're juggling a lot more constraints and understanding what your constraints are and coming up with a strategy to deal with each one.
So it sounds like that geography study at Cal State Long Beach really came in handy with some of the other classes associated with that geography class that you mentioned in terms of, what's going on underneath and historically, how has it been used before and that whole object. So you're right, you don't have to be the expert, but you have to know enough to know when you need an expert.
Right, and this is where the curiosity has to come in, is because you're not going to take a class on, I'm going to say you're not, one isn't, but I doubt that if you're working full time, you're going to go out and take a class on various constituents in the soil and groundwater, or whatever. But the alternative is you're going to read. You have to read, and then you have to ask questions. So you go to your consultant and say, I was reading this, what's so bad about, the PCEs or hydrocarbons or all these other things, and you start to understand the aspects of all these constituents so that you can get a better understanding of how that would either A, warrant you proceeding on saying this is a good site, or B, saying this is a site that isn't good and we're going to pass on it.
Yeah. So another question that's come in is, you have to choose the right land to develop and repurpose. What data do you lean on? What does that process look like? And how do you pull from your geography knowledge?
So I'm going to say one thing, and I was teaching a class a graduate class in the real estate development program at Cal this spring, and there isn't a right program or a right development. And what I mean by that is there's limitations based on land use from zoning, but there's a whole myriad or multitude of things that you can do. And so as a project manager, it's coming up with a plan or your vision and then being able to justify it. And you're justifying it on three folds. One is there market acceptance for what you're proposing? Whatever it means, meaning you build it, are you going to be able to sell it? Are you going to be able to lease it up? Is it actually viable from a market standpoint? And so what are you going to rely on? You're going to hire at least a marketing consultant that's going to give you an overview of what the market is. you know, how much supplies out there today, what the rents are or what the sales prices are, and what's in the pipeline, meaning how many projects are approved and not built yet. And you're going to have to make some decisions like, okay, I believe that the market is strong, or there isn't a market, and I'm going to have to say I'm going to pass. The other one is from a standpoint of, from financial standpoint, is your project able to go out and get a loan, financing for it, the construction and the permanent loan? Is how are the lenders receptive to your particular project? Like, for an example, during COVID, if you said, I have my hotel and I'm ready to go, guess what? You weren't going to get anyone to finance it. Just no one was at the time. And in the lending industry, it often is herd mentality. I'm not saying 100%, but that's often the case. And then third, the other component is if you have to get approvals from the local agency because there's something different that doesn't exactly comply with the land use regulations, does your proposal actually have political support? And you'd be doing political support by A, what's your community? What's the neighborhood? Are you doing outreach? Can you get people from the community to come and actually support your project? Or are they opposed to it? And then have you talked to the politicians or the elected or appointed officials? What are their thoughts? Not that they're going to say, oh, I think this is the best thing since sliced bread, but you have to gauge that, because at the end of the day, you're going to make a significant investment to get to the point to get the project for consideration. And you don't want to spend all of those resources and find out that the project isn't going to be received. So you're relying on other experts, consultants, whether it's consultants on the marketing side, you doing outreach, or having a firm doing some of the outreach for you, to understand all of that, and then understanding the financial aspects. Is it financially viable?
Another question was, did working with city planners help you with the development entitlement process? How did you learn about the approvals process and how to interact with government agencies?
So working at the city was I'm not gonna say it's my shoe in, but I understood, working there for a little over 5 years, you understood what the governmental process was. Not that every agency is the same, but you can understand that if you do A, it leads to B, and B leads to C. So it's understanding that process. And also what was helpful for me is I was able to understand, I don't say nuances, but some of the things like with subdivision mapping and things like that, because I was on the public sector side, and I could carry those things, that experience, put it in my tool bag and use it on the private side when we're talking about subdivision mapping and all of the nuances that typically people don't get into. But I just happen to be fortunate to have a lot of exposure doing that when I was working on the public agencies.
So a couple of questions came in about where do you see the commercial real estate industry going, both brick and mortar shops and in-person office space?
So commercial, we kind of divide it in a couple of segments. If we're talking about retail, I think retail from a big picture standpoint is challenged in the future. I think now, and when I say challenge, I'm talking about it in generalities, because we actually have a lot of retail, and I don't know if there is a substantial demand for how much more retail there may be. Now, in new communities, will there be new retail? Absolutely. Grocery stores, some food services, etc. So that the retail on a large scale, especially as you start getting the larger retail, like many of the malls that were built in the 70s and 80s, we're going to see those repurposed. There's no doubt in my mind. I'm not going to say every one, but I think several of them, like in Orange County, Main Place Mall, that's going to get repurposed to some degree. The what is it, Broadway Plaza, or what, I can't recall the name of the one in Anaheim. And you're starting to see it like at the Huntington Center, et cetera. So those are going to get repurposed to some degree, become more mixed use. Now, if we're talking about now on the employment side, office, I think, I think we're just in a lull with the office, with the demand. The industry reacts often very quickly, but over the long term, and it's not because I, do office developments from time to time or commercial development, but I think that there's a lot of benefit in having people working in the office. It doesn't mean that you're working in the office the way we have historically, 8 to 5, 8 to whatever it is, Monday through Friday. Maybe there's some type of, it's likely some type of hybrid model. But I think the biggest change will be is especially on the tech side and the firms that really had a lot of people in offices that were essentially desks back to back, side to side. I think that that model is going to go away for some time. And so what you're going to see is still demand for office, but the demand is driven because the density, instead of having 5 or 6 people per 1,000 square feet, you're maybe at 3,000 to 4,000 people. And so the density is lower. And so the demand for office probably stays as it's been over the last 10, 15 years.
So do you think that COVID really kind of blew that whole theory of office, working in the office? It's kind of going to drive people to look at things differently because they can look and see what worked and what didn't work and come up with that hybrid.
I'm certain that's the only thing that drove it. Otherwise, it just would have been, the status quo and nothing would have changed.
Okay, so now someone's asking, and I know that you're talking, you're at the senior VP level where
Yes.
you're at right now. So, and we've been talking a lot about kind of when you were in the trenches and moving up. So what does a typical day look like for you in your role as senior VP?
So I should tell you both, because working for a small firm, it's different than working for a large firm. So with Catellus, I started as a project manager and worked all the way up to an EVP, executive vice president. And in the senior and EVP positions, the good is you have a title. Okay, if you're into those titles, which I'm not, but so as those roles, you're really administrating. You're a manager. You're managing people. You're looking at very large budgets. So we're putting together a 5-year capital budget. We're doing our annual budget spends. If you're working for a publicly traded company, you've got to get on the 10K calls. You do the annual reports. You're doing a lot of administrative stuff. And for me, that was a bummer. It's like, it took me away from the things that I really like to do. So that's what, I'm saying on a broad standpoint. Now you may, like when I was at Catellus, I had a number of people, 13, 14 people under me. You're giving them direction, like, think about this, what about that? Where are you on your budgets, or how's our project progressing along the time frame? What issues are coming up? You're running meetings or whatever, but you're not doing the project management anymore because you have too many other commitments. So fast forward after I left Catellus because they converted to a different operating company, and I'm ended up here at Signature. I've been there twice, been here twice. We're a small firm. We're only 20 some odd people, 22, 23. And here I'm very hands-on. So I still manage projects. We have a few junior staff, which is fine, but I'm no different than I was, I say no different, just with more years of experience, less hair on my head and more gray hair, of managing projects on all aspects, from when we first look at projects, if we're going to do some due diligence, an evaluation, is this something that we want to acquire? And then putting together, the overall budget for a project on what we think it's going to cost to get it entitled, and come up with some designs, come up with a strategy on how we're going to get the land use approvals through the local agency, and then assemble the design team that is the architect, landscape architect, your civil engineer, and if we're going to start to design it and build it, then the balance of the team from a geotechnical engineer, putting together a team for the marketing, all of those aspects. And on a day-to-day, it's A, understanding what our team is doing. B, it's probably solving some kind of problem. The city may be asking for some data, and I need to get that data wherever it is from consultants, or maybe it's something that I'm generating. It's preparing memos. It's updating a schedule. Where are we tracking? We're trying to get to a certain point in time. Are we able to get that? And it's reviewing studies that are being prepared. Like, for an example, there may be a biological assessment that looks at what the existing resources are on the site, and you look and see, are there any issues? Or maybe there's something that says you need to do a survey for bird nesting, and if they're a bird nest, you can't start construction. And then you're like, holy smokes, that could affect our schedule. And bird nesting goes from February to September. And so it's understanding things like that. So that's kind of my day-to-day. And but more than likely, it's just coming up with solutions to problems.
It sounds though, Eric, that you're more satisfied with being more hands-on.
Oh,
Not a senior VP, yeah, right? I can tell just by when you're talking, so.
right.
And that is an important issue with people, with the folks that are listening, for the longevity of your career, is you have to be liking what you're doing. You want to come in and actually do the work, and you get something from it. Because sometimes people just stay in the same jobs and they keep going up, but they're not happy with the work. That's when you look outside of work, right? To kind of balance. Do you have a balance?
So I have to say that from a work standpoint, I am extremely fortunate to fall into this career that I love, because I never set out on this path. If you had asked me back in 1980, 79, 81, 82, are you going to be in development? I would have looked at you like, absolutely not. But I love it. And so I spend a lot of time working. So I would say, unfortunately, my work-life balance is a little bit out of balance. But when I'm not working, I love to be outdoors. So I cycle. If I really need to unplug, because with this business, if for alum or students, if you said, boy, I'd love to be a real estate developer, if you're doing a good job, you're thinking about this job or your projects long after you've left the office. You know, on Saturday morning, when you're trying to read the paper, you're thinking of solutions or problems or whatever. So yeah, I love to be outdoors. So I cycle on the weekends. I love to do long range fishing, and that allows me to, that's the only thing I do that allows me to unplug, because guess what? There's no texting, there's no internet, and there's no emails. So being out on that boat for days, for several days, that's great unplugging. And then in the wintertime, I love to ski and wakeboard, but anything outdoors is what I do to try and provide a little work-life balance.
Yeah, that's great. Now I'm going to come back because there's just a couple of questions that I want to make sure get answered.
Sure.
Another question that came in: currently, many of the current development projects in urban areas are multi-units. Do you foresee that will change? Will the future not see single-family homes?
No. So I don't mean to say no. So it's not that you won't see single-family homes. One of the biggest challenges that you have in urban areas, as I had mentioned, often those areas that are redeveloping have been either commercial or industrial type uses, and a large percentage of the time they're industrial uses, and there's impacts with the soil. And the regulators, which could be the Department of Toxic Substances Control or the Regional Water Control Board, when it comes to residential uses, they have to have a very high level of very high standard of cleanliness of the soil of constituents. And the problem with single family homes is you typically have yards. And typically when you get an approval, it's on a site that has contamination, whether it's in the groundwater and in the soil. The whole idea is to prevent humans to have access to the soil or groundwater. And when you have a single family home, you typically have a yard, you want to plant some plants, grow a garden or whatever. That's not going to work. And the only way it does work is to pick up all that soil and go haul it somewhere else to contaminate it. So you won't see, I'm not saying in all circumstances, but in areas where it's been commercial or industrial, it's typically not going to result in single family homes.
Right. Another question is that you mentioned needing a natural curiosity to thrive in this field. How do you continue to be curious and continue to learn?
I love to read. I love, I'm just saying for me, if I'm not outside and I'm not doing chores around the house or whatever, I love to read. And the things that I like to read are, besides some fiction, are books about, sometimes it's economics, but it's where there are, call it quote, exploitation of inefficiencies in the business world. And so, like for an example, there is one book that I really enjoyed, and I don't know who the author was, it was a while ago, but it was titled Quants That Nearly Brought Down Wall Street. And it was a series over, 30 years of various activities that took place that actually disrupted the market when they failed. But before they failed, it was like, oh, think of it as I don't know what the age of all the participants are today, but it's kind of like the dot-com bubble. It's like, and it's not, I'm not saying that, but it was like suddenly that it's like you could do no wrong. Another one I read was Michael Lewis was Flash Boys, and that's all about kind of the dark pools and laying fiber so that you can do trades before anyone else could and things like that. So I love reading stuff like that. And does that necessarily help me on my job? But no, but it makes me think about things that, are we doing everything we could? Is there something that we can do that makes our operations a little better or streamlined?
Yeah. It sounds like that curiosity thing we were talking about earlier.
Yeah, I guess.
Another question, with limited land and parcel availability, how do you and your firm get creative about acquisitions?
Oh, you're always looking. You're always looking for land. And the reason why is we probably, to be very honest, and most developers will tell you, you look at 100 sites and maybe 5 or 6 actually pan out. So you're constantly looking, and if you're fortunate, you have a couple of, maybe I might say a firm may have someone that's just solely dedicated to acquisitions, or you may have a relationship with a couple of brokers that really understand your firm. It's not any broker, but understand your firm, what type of acquisition you're interested in, but that's what you have to do. It takes a lot of time, and very few ever pan out.
Well, we've got about 3 minutes, so I'm going to ask you the last question, and
Sure.
then have you just kind of touch on some of the industry organizations that really have helped you kind of open doors and just the networking piece. So what is the most rewarding aspect of your current role and the biggest challenge? And then I'll let you go after that.
Sure. What is the most rewarding? I think it's twofold. One is, as I kind of reiterated, for me, is solving problems. It's like, look at that, we got that solved. And then B, it's actually what, the other satisfaction is it's very, real estate development is very tangible. It's seeing the finished product. It's actually being able to go back, years after, like, for an example, when I go down to Mission Bay and say, holy smokes, look at everything that's happened since I've been gone. And you know what? It actually came out the way we planned it, with the buildings looking very similar or whatever it may be. So that's really rewarding for me, is those two aspects. What was the other question?
Okay, you know what? I'm going to give you one question that I
Sure.
absolutely have to ask you.
Yes.
What do you look for in new hires? What skills and qualities are pertinent for you to have on your team?
So whenever I'm hiring someone, there's a couple of things. A, I like to find out how curious they are. Like, oh yeah, I do this or whatever. B, understanding, do they have financial literacy? And then it's kind of like, why do you want to be in real estate development? And the reason why I ask that, it's not so much like a trick question, but real estate development is, I have 3 sons. They're all adults. I didn't encourage, in fact, I discouraged any of them from going into this business, even though I love it. But the bummer with this business is, when it's great, it is absolutely fantastic. But when it's bad, it's absolutely terrible. And so as I've gone through these recessions, the unemployment in the industry is extremely high. And it could be for a number of years, there aren't any jobs. And so if you're unemployed, you're not getting any. And I have friends that I've known for many years that have lost jobs and have not come back to the industry, because they're like, yeah, one and done, or, I've gone through it twice and I've lost jobs twice. I'm not getting back in there. So it's making certain that they understand that, sure, this is a very rewarding industry, but it has its pitfalls.
We got 1 minute, so we're going to have to, I think I got most of the questions though. Famous last words. Okay, Eric, advice, whatever.
So if you're asking me, famous last words would be, hey, find a career that you love, because, life is short. So make certain you love it, that you can get up every day and say, you know what, this isn't drudgery. And then the other is, never stop learning, so you can continue to put tools in your tool bag, regardless of what career you go into, because it's so important, because careers and technology continues to evolve. You don't ever want to be on the outside looking in.
Great. Well, we are at 11:45, so we did a good job, Eric. It went really well. I want to go ahead and pass it back over to Noemi.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you, Lucia, for a very engaging conversation. Eric, before we go, I know you stress the power of networking, and we know you're on LinkedIn. Are you okay if our listeners, our alumni or student were to reach out to you on LinkedIn?
Oh, absolutely. If anyone has questions or wants to communicate with me, they can contact me directly via LinkedIn. And I think that if necessary, get a hold of Cynthia. She has my email, and you can always go via email. I don't check LinkedIn every day. So
okay, wonderful. Well, thank you again. And anyone that would like to connect with Eric, please email us at alumni@csuob.edu, and we will connect you to via email. We thank everyone for attending today. Just a reminder to visit our website to learn about future programs like this and follow us on social media. Thank you and have a great day.